In July 1861, ornate carriages rolled out from Washington, D.C., carrying eager congressmen and socialites dressed in their Sunday best. They brought picnic baskets to a grassy hill overlooking a stream called Bull Run, expecting a brief, clean spectacle of old-world maneuvers. North of the Mason-Dixon line, heavy factory and railroad infrastructure fueled an industrializing free labor economy. To the south, the landscape was defined by a vast network of agricultural plantations that relied entirely on the labor of 4 million enslaved people. Many Southerners believed they were an innately superior, aristocratic class, born to lead. Meanwhile, the North assumed their numerical advantage and manufacturing base would allow them to crush the rebellion and restore the Union in exactly 90 days. But when the two sides met in the valley below, 19th century tactics met the ferocity of modern firepower. The orderly lines collapsed into chaos under the pressure of a Confederate counterattack. The Union Army broke, sending soldiers and terrified civilian spectators into a panicked retreat toward the capital. The Great Skedaddle from Bull Run proved that the idea of a short, chivalrous war was a lethal fantasy. The nation had marched blindly into a prolonged industrial struggle. The industrialization of the sea arrived in the form of heavy iron plating and massive rotating gun turrets. These armored behemoths rendered traditional wooden hulls obsolete, moving naval combat into the machine age. On land, the widespread use of the rifled musket proved even more devastating. These weapons fired conical lead bullets accurate at hundreds of yards, making the traditional tactic of marching shoulder to shoulder a suicidal endeavor. The Battle of Shiloh forced a horrific realization on the American public. In just 2 days of fighting, the casualty counts exceeded the losses of all previous American wars combined. The conflict was transforming into a relentless meat grinder. The carnage at Antietam, the bloodiest single day in the nation's history, gave Abraham Lincoln the political leverage to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. Preserving the Union was now explicitly tied to the destruction of the institution of slavery. Confederate generals achieved brilliant tactical successes at places like Chancellorsville, but these victories were purchased at a price the South could not sustain. They fought against the cold reality of superior industrial output and massive demographic weight. Lincoln's early commanders operated with a cautious, old-world mentality. They spent months drilling their troops, seemingly more afraid of losing their armies than they were determined to use them to end the rebellion. Ulysses S. Grant was a pragmatist who lacked the flamboyant polish of his predecessors. He recognized that the Union's greatest weapon was not a specific tactic, but its overwhelming capacity to absorb losses and keep moving forward. Grant operated on the logic of numbers. While the North's population could continuously replenish its ranks, the South's smaller pool of manpower meant that every heavy engagement brought the Confederacy closer to a total depletion of its reserves. Grant's rise to command signaled the end of tactical maneuvering as the primary path to victory. The war would now be won through the grim process of outdying the enemy. The era of the flamboyant, romantic cavalry commander ended as men like Jeb Stuart were shot from their saddles. For the average soldier, survival now depended on a shovel and a hole in the earth. At Spotsylvania's Bloody Angle, 20 hours of continuous, point-blank fire created such a density of lead that a 2-foot-thick oak tree was physically severed by the hail of bullets. At Petersburg, the North detonated tons of gunpowder beneath Confederate lines, leaving a desolate crater. In these trenches, men lived like moles in the dirt. Stripped of battlefield glory, they endured a daily existence defined by filth, disease, and the constant threat of sudden death. By 1864, the battlefields of America had devolved into a mechanized hellscape. The static, high-casualty warfare of the siege foreshadowed the global conflicts that would define the 20th century. The North eventually embraced the doctrine of total war. Defeating the enemy's army was no longer the sole objective. Victory required the systematic destruction of the South's physical and economic ability to exist. Union forces moved through the heart of the South, tearing up railroads, burning storehouses, and leveling industrial centers. The violence was no longer confined to a battlefield. It was inflicted directly upon the infrastructure of the southern states. The final toll was over 600,000 lives. For the survivors, the war left a legacy of broken bodies and a landscape dotted with massive field hospitals, where a generation of maimed men struggled to recover from the industrial-scale violence. The American Civil War did more than preserve the Union and end slavery. It buried the romantic illusions of warfare forever, forcing an agrarian society to forge itself into a modern, industrialized nation in the fires of its own destruction.